Welcome to the Healing Power of Grief, an online conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Your host and moderator for this evening is Reverend Richard Carlini, minister and spiritual leader at Unity of Davis in California, and co-host of the Unity online radio show, The Healing Power of Grief.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our online conversation. It's so good to have you here tonight, and it's so good to be unmuted. It's such a joy for each of us to be here with you this evening. Thank you for attending this event. During our event this evening, everyone except our panelists will remain muted. Communication via the chat function is open and available starting now for communication or questions. If you want to post a comment or question, please direct it to everyone in the chat. No one will be monitoring the panelist chat. Please feel free to use the chat as much as you want. We'll be compiling questions. And speaking of compiling questions, our chat facilitator this evening is my friend and co-host on the Healing Power of Grief on Unity Online Radio, Reverend Bill Englehart. Bill, thanks for being here tonight.
Glad to be here. It's going to be a great show. We got a lot of expertise and a lot of people with big hearts to share here today.
Absolutely, Bill. Thank you. Let me know if there's something pressing in the chat. Bill will let me know of any chat communications that should come into our conversation. And we'll also be compiling questions for the panelists from you, our participants, for our Q&A session at the end. So thanks again, Bill. And now let's get on to the healing power of grief. Grief. Thank you for being willing to join a conversation on grief. My co-host Bill says that it's a taboo topic, and we're starting to slowly bringing it out of being taboo. So congratulations on being here tonight. And let's stop for a moment and let's just all take a deep breath. And exhale. For grief is a universal experience, and we will each suffer the loss of loved ones. During this special online event, our panelists will address the impact of grief on our lives, explore the effects of compound grief, and share how to uncover gratitude during the grieving process. During this 2-hour conversation, you'll hear from authors, ministers, and teachers about their own experiences of grief and how we can all embrace the healing power of grief. Topics that we're going to discuss tonight include how the gift of grief has changed my life, telling your story about your loved one, understanding compound grief, saying goodbye when you didn't get to say goodbye, and finding humor during grief. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists this evening. Welcome, everybody. Our first panelist is Ty Alexander, who's waving at you, speaker and author of Things I Wish I Knew Before My Mom Died. Ty Alexander of Gorgeous in Gray is one of the top bloggers today with a wonderful personal connection with her readers. This is never more apparent, her personal connection with her readers, than when she speaks about her mom. The pain of loss for mourners is universal, yet we all grieve differently. For Ty, the grieving process is one that she lives with day to day. Learning from her pain, she connects with the readers on a deeply emotional level in her book, Things I Wish I Knew Before My Mom Died, Coping with Loss Every Day. From grief counseling to sharing insightful true stories, Alexander offers comfort, reassurance, and hope in the face of sorrow. Inside her comforting and insightful book, you'll find help with pain of losing a loved one, assistance in understanding the grieving process, and comfort and support while learning to move on. Good evening, Ty. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Ty. Our next panelist is Alan Klein, TEDx speaker and author of Embracing Life After Loss, a gentle guide for growing through grief. My friend Alan Klein is quite the gentleman, and he says that losing a loved one is never easy. And Alan Klein knows how it feels, just like you do. He's lost loved ones in his life. Inspired by Klein's experiences with the loss of his wife, embracing life after loss will help you recover from grief and loss, just like Klein did. You never forget the people you lose, but you can grow stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of life as you move forward. And believe it or not, you can even laugh again. Embracing life after loss will show you how to smile through the difficult times, how to take a break from the pain of your loss and find joy in life again. Embracing life after loss is a steadfast compass that offers hope and resilience to anyone trying to navigate through dark times. Welcome, Alan. Great to have you here tonight. Our next panelist is Emily Thiroux Threatt, speaker and author of Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief. Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief is a handbook for dealing with grief, organized so you can pick and choose a topic from the table of contents pertaining to the issues affecting you the most at the moment. Emily says that you can rediscover sustained moments of joy as you seek a new way of being in the world. Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief guides and lightens the journey to positivity for those who feel the pain of loss, whether it's the loss of a loved one, a job, a marriage, a house, pregnancy, a nest egg, anything that we loved and that is no longer in our lives. Emily, welcome. Good to have you here.
Aloha. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Aloha, Emily. Emily's been moving through the storms that have been going through the archipelago over there, and we're lucky to have her with us tonight. She has power and she's keeping an eye on the water. And last but certainly not least, my friend and colleague, Sue Frederick, lifelong grief intuitive and spiritual coach and author of Bridges to Heaven, True Stories of Loved Ones on the Other Side. Sue states that death is not the end. In fact, your loved ones who have passed are watching you, helping you, and healing you, though you may not know it. In this highly emotional book, Lifelong Intuitive, Sue Frederick takes you through the process of connecting with the other side, to use your intuition to understand that your loved ones are at peace, to see into the other side, to feel and release your pain, to understand a bigger view of spirituality and what happens after life, and so much more. If you've lost a loved one or did not get to say goodbye, Sue gives us permission to continue the conversation with our departed loved ones once they've left the human experience realm. Welcome, Sue. Good to have you here.
Oh, it's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, since we have you, Sue, let's start with you and hear just a little bit about how the gift of grief changed your life. What is it that's a gift for you from the grief you've experienced and how it changed your life?
Well, in 1979, my husband died from cancer and we were both 29, 30. And I would not have called it a gift then. It was quite devastating. But what I've learned in my journey is that that moment of deep grief became my greatest spiritual teacher. So my whole life is about spirit, soul, consciousness. That's what I do for a living, is coaching and writing and teaching. None of that would have happened without the gift of my loss of my husband when I was 29. So I don't think we often call grief a gift at the moment it happens, but later when we see where it took our life, that's when I believe that we realize it's our great spiritual teacher.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Emily, what is the gift of grief for you?
Ironically, the gift of grief to me is happiness. I'm find it funny that I would be saying something like that, but after I had two husbands die, I wasn't sure what my purpose was. And as I figured it out, what I would do being in this position was that I could do so much that would not only help me, but help other people who are dealing with loss. And that was a gift to me, that I've been able to do that. And it's brought me great happiness. And I've discovered how happiness and grief can happen at the same time. And I love to share that.
Oh, I love that. Happiness and grief coexisting together. That's a good goal for all of us. Thank you, Emily. Thank you. And Ty, the gift of grief.
I think also to kind of piggyback off of Sue and Emily, just the opportunity to be able to touch so many people that have dealt with what I've dealt with, or still, because I don't think grief is something that you ever really get over. And so just the opportunity to be able to touch so many lives with the experience that we think is singular, and it's really not. So again, that the opportunity for me has been a blessing in my grieving journey.
And Alan?
So again, I will dovetail on what's been said, but my wife died when she was 34, and we found out she had a rare liver disease at 31. So looking back, I would never think that, out of that experience, there would be a gift. And yet, I'm the author of 30 some odd books. I'm an award-winning professional speaker, probably have spoken to at least 50,000 people, get so many responses of how I've changed people's lives. I don't know where I would be today. Not that I wanted my wife to die, but it was such a major, major change in my life that, again, when I look back, I go, look what came out of that loss. So for me, that was the gift of grief, is being able to help people and help them either get through their loss or helping them enjoy life more.
Well, thank you all. I'm hearing that in order for grief to be a gift, we have to give it time. We have to go through the process. We have to be able to go through it our own way. And we have to have hope for the future. And we can certainly see that hope came to fruition for all of you. And I'm also sure that there's a story behind how you got involved in this work, how your book came to be. You each had your personal story. And I'd like to hear just a short snippet of it so our participants can get to know you and hear similar stories, because telling our story is important. When we don't tell our story, it stays stuck. But being able to tell our story helps us move through the process. So, Emily, maybe you could start us off here.
Sure. I have experienced so much grief in my life. Most of my relatives are gone, my parents, my sister, and grief comes with every death in any circumstances. But more recently, I've had 2 husbands die, and I found myself trying to figure out what to do, and just felt kind of lost. And the more I worked on it, I wrote a lot, because I'm a writer. I teach writing at the university besides writing my most recent book and textbooks and things like that. So writing seemed natural to me for something to do. And the more I wrote, the better I felt. There's something about getting it out of your head and onto paper that helps you deal with things. And I was finding things that really helped me. So I found other people who were dealing with grief that I could teach these different things to, and it really helped them. And they've stuck with me from the beginning. We're still writing together, and it's helped so much. And I realized that my experience makes me the perfect person to be able to help someone else through the experience, because so many times people feel lost and they just need someone to hold their hand or put their arm around their shoulders and say, just talk to me, or let me sit here with you, or let me listen. And when you are able to do that, it helps them be able to kind of breathe again. And in the process of all this, I discovered that I just kept getting happier the more that I was helping other people. And that happiness has truly changed my life. I can say that I'm happier now, honestly, than I ever have been. And it's pretty wonderful. And who would think that the death of two husbands would bring you to happiness? But it does when I can show people actual practices that they can do that can help themselves. I can just be there for people. And it's very comforting work for me as well as for the people that I deal with.
So
Oh,
Emily,
thank you,
this is
Emily.
Bill. A question came up about when you're writing to process grief. Is it free form writing, or is that the best, or is there some kind of guided writing better?
I don't think that there's a best way, because there's so many different ways that you can deal with it. You can do free form or free writing, just journal writing, where you just talk about what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, what your desires are, what you would like to happen right now, all those sort of things. But there are other things that you can do too. One of my favorite things to do and to work with people on is to write letters to my loved ones who have died. And it's freeing in a way. I feel like I have a different relationship with them now, even when they were here with me.
Well, thank you, Emily. And your comment there, having a different relationship with them now than when they were here with you, leads me to call on Sue Frederick to tell her story if she would. So, Sue, what do you
Thank
have
you.
to say?
Thank you, Reverend Rich. I do believe that the key to surviving and thriving after a devastating loss is really to understand that death is not the end, that our consciousness continues, and that we can have a new and an even healthier relationship with our departed once they've crossed the veil. And my departed came back so many times to teach me this and show me, because after my husband Paul died, I mean, he came to me that very first night, and he was departed, but he was actually in bed with me, and I felt him and saw him and knew he was with me. And from then on, I also had continuous experiences of him visiting and telling me what it was like in the divine realms. And a year later, I lost my best childhood girlfriend, Chrissy, and she was my lifelong friend. And we laughed together all the time when she was here. And her first gift to me was the night she crossed over. Before I even knew she'd crossed, she was with me all night in my dreams, making me laugh and giggle so hard that my stomach hurt. And so Chrissy, Paul, and my dad, I consider them to be my great teachers, because they've come through to show me how to help grieving people, how to teach people to connect to their departed. And when I work with grieving clients, especially grieving parents, the thing that changes their life completely is when they understand that, yes, their child is coming to help them heal and has so much love and is not suffering and is not alone and is not hurting the way we are here on earth. This is the hard part, here on earth. And so when a mom understands that their child is thriving in the divine realms, and they talk to their child, and what I do with writing, because I'm a writer too, I was a journalist for 20 years, but I have the spirit write to the mom through automatic writing that comes after meditating. So when you sit down and meditate and then start writing from your departed, you'll be amazed what comes through you from them. So.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for sharing your story and where you've been since that triad of losses there. And we all bring losses with us, and we all find different ways to cope with those losses. And I think what's so important for all of you that are here today is that we're talking and we're listening and we're seeking resources, because I never had anybody sit down and say, let's talk about grief. As you go through life, you're going to be experiencing grief. Now, here's how you deal with that, or here's how I dealt with that. And so we've got some good resources in these panelists today and good information coming out. And Ty, tell us your story and what's going on with you, girl. Let's hear it.
Well, my mom passed away. Well, I'm sorry. First, she got cancer 2012. And so she passed away in 2013. So it was a very quick process. But I saw someone in a comment mention about like grieving before they actually die. And that's really what I did because we knew really early on that it was terminal cancer and that she probably would only last about 6 months. And so I was beginning to kind of prepare my mind, unbeknownst to myself, with the grieving process. Mango, which is my publisher, actually reached out to me after I had wrote an article about another incident of grief I'd experienced. I had met another blogger and she actually committed suicide. And I wrote an article, it was published on Cosmopolitan, and I just wrote about, our experience. And we'd only exchanged emails, and I had never really because I was grieving, I was maybe 6 months into my own grief when she had died or taken her life. And so I was kind of shook up because I thought that I could save her of sorts, if that makes sense. And so I wrote about it. And that's when Mango contacted me and thought that it would be good if I wrote a book. And so we came up with things I wish I knew before my mom died. And it's really a short memoir, self-help mashup of sorts about my experience with grief and my mom. I tell funny stories, I curse. It's just me being me and kind of sharing, what grief has done for me, both good and bad, because as you said in the beginning, grief isn't always filled with sadness. It's lots of duality in grief for me. And as I know a lot of the panelists, we experience, joy and happiness and sadness. Every milestone that I go through, I experience the joy of it. And then also the sadness of it because my mom, and my loved ones aren't here. When those expectations, I'm also grieving. So that's a little bit of my story.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing up the question that was in the chat. I saw it fly by too, and I was going to ask Billy to mention it, but you did. And I think it's well worth the time to say that, yes, that anticipatory grief that we experience is a process within itself, and it's not something we should deny ourselves. The joy of going through and the necessity of going through that anticipatory grief as we wait for loved ones who've been given a terminal experience and sit and go through that and deal with the trauma of finding that out and then process that. And then we lose that loved one from the human experience, and there's another set of grief after that, a totally different set of grief, and we need to acknowledge both.
And I'm just going to jump in there because one of the questions came up was about that very thing, that grief doesn't just happen after someone makes their transition or after there's some kind of a loss. There could be a long window of someone, a friend, a family member who's been ill, that we can see it happening, or we recognize our job is going away because the company's shutting down. So there can be all kinds of anticipatory grief. And so if anyone wants to speak more to that.
And Alan.
Yeah, I would like to speak a little of that because we knew my wife had a terminal illness for 3 years. The doctor, in fact, said she had 3 years to live. So there was grief during those 3 years. But one point I want to bring up that maybe we haven't talked about is even though like I went through 3 years of grief, that moment of death is still, you would think, oh, I've gotten over this or something. No. It's the moment that loved one dies. It's like you haven't grieved at all. It's like incredible grief, at least for me. So I don't want us to kind of gloss over that, the anticipatory, whatever that word is. Anticipatory grief is like the end of it. It's like it's so big sometimes, even after you've gone through that.
I agree with that 100%, Alan, because my husband had colon cancer. So he was dying and suffering for a year and a half. And when he died, actually, I had people say to me, well, you knew he was going to die. Doesn't that help? And my answer was, heck no, it doesn't
No.
help. It just prolongs your grief.
Yeah, yeah.
I can talk about that from a little bit different perspective with my two husbands who died. Jacques was the first one to die, and both of them were ill for actually quite a while before they died. Both of them choose to think that they were going to still live a long time and make the most of their life while they were here. But Jacques was kind of in denial, which was interesting because he was a bioethicist and his specialty was the ethics of living and dying. So he dealt with death all the time. And he just didn't realize that he was actually going to die from this. And so I felt like we kind of lost time with the denial of what was going on that we could have had some good conversations with if that wouldn't have happened. Where with Ron, when he was dying, or when he was living until he died, we lived in the moment. And we talked about everything, and we did whatever we wanted to do, and we made the very, very best out of every moment that we had. And each time when they actually transitioned, it was heartbreaking for me, and it was really strong. It didn't matter how prepared I was, but I found that I moved forward a lot more quickly after Ron died, when we had really kind of worked through so many things and talked through so many things that even though I was with Jacques for all that time before he died, we didn't really get to deal with things.
Yeah, and that's such a big part of this discussion is having those conversations, being willing to have those conversations. And I'm sure we've got multi-generations on here, and each generation is different in the way that they've grown up, and the way that they view death, the way that they look at grief. And we're moving into a conversation I'd like to have about compound grief, and you've all talked about it. And when you look at, and I see a number of chats going through about unexpected death, about unexpected death and all the recent deaths from COVID. And so when we begin talking about compound grief and what we have to do to prioritize our grief today, and then looking at the anticipatory grief that we're going through and the actual grief, it's a lot to deal with today. And I'd like to talk about what each of you can recommend, what you think about this, have a conversation about that compound grief today, and how we deal with it and how we move forward. Who would like to get us started on that?
I would just like to say that I don't know many people that have died from COVID. However, when I think back, I did live through the AIDS crisis, and I have a little notebook where I have 40 of my friends or colleagues died from AIDS. And I'm sure there's a lot of people going through that, have that many people maybe that they know dying from COVID. And it was like, almost like, how could I go on? You know, another friend, another person. And yet somehow we managed to go on. You know, we're incredible. I'm a big theater person, and Thornton Wilder's play Skin of Our Teeth. And it's about this family that goes through the ages, the Ice Age and the wars and all these, the plague, and we get through it all. Somehow, you know, we get through it and through the loss. And it's part of who we are. It's part of our life. It's part of what we deal with. And it is not, you know, something we ask for. It is not something that we want to deal with, but yet we do, and we survive. And I think one thing people need to keep that in mind is that we will survive. We're going to maybe lose some people, but we, as a humanity, we will survive. And it's so important to keep that in mind when you're dealing with individuals that you know have died, that somehow you, your children, your family somehow will survive.
And I think that's part of a perspective that you have to be willing to take on yourself as you're going through this, to know that I will survive, to find hope in there for a reason to survive, to find hope that you will go on. And I think whatever, Ellen, whatever faith-based background we come from, even if it's not a religious faith background, but whatever gives us faith, helps us move forward through these times. We call that forward. We call the faith that our mother gave us forward, don't we, Ty? And we go on from what the lessons we learned from our mother.
Yeah, it's one of the last chapters in my book.
Rich, we've got a comment from Arturo talking about compound grief, who says, in February, we lost mom to lung cancer. I moved back home to take care of mom during hospice care. Then last week, we lost dad suddenly. He was dealing with Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's disease. Also last week, I lost my job. I'm dealing with a lot of grief, a crisis of faith. So grief doesn't just come up often as one thing.
Yeah.
I've experienced in life, we experience grief on many, many levels. But when all those things are coming on at once, do any of the panelists have any advice or insights?
Yeah, I would like to speak to that. I think you said his name was Arturo, right?
Correct.
You know, there are times in our journeys here on Earth where we go through huge reinvention points. And I talk about this in all my books, and we all have these in our life. And when those happen, it's when we've lost someone we love. Usually our career has crashed and burned. Also, maybe we're even having to move into a different house or something. And it just feels like the end of the world. And I know I've been in those situations, and I'm sure all of you have at some point. And what we learn from that is that surrender is the ultimate faith, is that if I can just simply say, okay, I have to let all of this go now, because that's what is happening in my life, and I can let it go with love, and I can trust that my whole new life is being built, even if I can't see where it's going, that somehow this is a guided process, and that my departed loved ones are even helping me get through this, and they have a plan for the rest of my life if I can just surrender with love and trust.
Yeah, to dovetail on what Sue just said, what has gotten me through multiple losses sometime is to focus on what I still had in my life, rather than what I lost. And you know, when my wife died, I still had my house, I had my daughter, I had my friends, I had my job. Yes, Arturo may have lost a lot, but I'm sure there are things in his life that he can still count on. And the other thing is, and this is a major thing for me, is I couldn't see, and Sue was just addressing this, I could not see what was down the road a year, 2 years, 5 years. I didn't know that I would become a professional speaker and an author, influencing thousands of people's lives because my wife died. I didn't know that. So we don't know, you know, we just know the moment, which is very painful and hurts. But again, the trust, the faith, whatever you can latch onto could be so important at this point, and realize that hopefully this will unveil why this is happening to you when you see it in hindsight.
Thank you, Ellen. Ty?
I was going to say, I think language is really important for me. And so I really don't like to even use the terminology that I lost my mom. I know exactly where she went. She died. And it's unfortunate. It makes me sad. I have lots of unanswered questions that when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask Jesus myself. But I think it's really, for me, using the word loss negates the human experience that I had with my mom. I didn't lose that experience. I still experienced it. I still experience it now. To Sue's point, she still comes in my dreams. I still have conversations with her. So nothing was lost technically. You know, she's absent physically, but I didn't lose that relationship with her. And so a lot of times I think we get so stuck on that terminology of I lost my parent, I lost my sibling, I lost my pet, I've lost. I think that allows you to be stuck in your grief process of kind of like the sadness of it versus, to Alan's point, realizing the people that you still have here that are, that deserve love, your love, that can give love back to you, all of the wonderful opportunities that will come out of this, just practicing that gratitude of it. So for me, I've completely eliminated the word loss because, again, reality is important to me. And the reality is my mom died. That's it. And so I think the more that we're able to speak the reality of grief, the more easier it'll be to maneuver through. I think we use a lot of language that sugarcoats it and kind of, gives it clouds and all this, whatever. But I think the more that we have these open conversations and really, for lack of better terms, like call a spade, like they died. Mm-hmm. And we've all honestly been duped. There is one very for sure certainty to everybody on this call. We are going to die. None of us are going to get past that. None of us are exempt. The only thing is to be determined is how and when, but you are going to die. And the minute that I realized that the people that I loved would die eventually, it allowed me to free up those moments for creating more joy, for getting closer to that person, for building better bonds, for making sure my bonds, were sacred and tight. And, and I did love those people, but I think we harp so much on the idea that we're going to lose this person. That is just life. There's an end to this life, unfortunately.
Well, hallelujah, praise Jesus. And I'm so glad we got down to that. I'm ready for it. And it's true. And Emily, I want to come on to you in a minute, but not come on to you in a minute. You forgive me. I want to call on you in a minute, but I'll leave it to Reverend Rich Carlini. And but I want to say, Ty, I think that's so important what you said, and we are all going to die. This human experience is going to cease at some point. The moment we take that first breath, there's going to be a last breath, and the human experience is going to be done. And until, like, we are starting to talk about grief now, until we become willing to talk about our own morbidity, our own mortality, the fact that I am, you are, mom is, dad is, brother and sister is going to die. And how are we going to feel when that happens? And what do they want? How do they want to die? And who do they want to be with him? Then our grief is going to be a lot different after we do have those conversations and after we do stay in those moments. And Emily, on all of that and compound grief, can you add something to this, please?
I think with what you were just saying, one of our difficulties, our challenges is with language, that people are not willing to speak grief. I've had people around me, they go, oh, you've had 2 husbands die, we're just staying away from you. And they don't know what to say, or they may say something that is hurtful without realizing it, or they may say something that they think is really helpful that really isn't. And it's very important, I think, that we need to be able to deal with all of this by being able to communicate better with each other. And we can do that by talking practicing, talk to the people you love, talk to them about what they want, about how they feel, about what you want and how you feel. I know at one point I said something to my daughter about what I would like to have happen when I die. And she no way she was going to talk about it. She goes, I hate it when you get like that. And I wasn't. I was being, calm and rational and in a good place, but she couldn't handle it. So if we can be nurturing with each other to support each other through this process of discovery and how you really feel, how you really believe, what you really need, and what you can give to each other, then it could change the world.
Yeah, and bringing this compound grief subject sort of to a close, and there's Sue, you want to talk about compound grief?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to what Ty said, because I loved what she said. Ty, when my husband died and people would come up to me and say, I'm so sorry for your loss, I would just go at them, because I would just say, I haven't lost anything. But I would also say, my husband is with me now. He's consciousness. He's not gone. But I've always also hated that term. Like, I remember even just recently somebody said, oh, you've had so many tragedies. And I was like, no, I haven't. I've had so many gifts, that language is so important. And for all of you on this call, tell your friends that what you need them to say to you is, baby, tell me your story. That's all you need. Because when you're grieving, you just need to keep talking about it and processing it and even explaining the moment of their departure. You just don't need somebody shutting you down about your tragedy. So you can hand out an index card to people and go, here's what you say. You say, tell me your story.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue. And all right, I'm going to go off script for just a little bit. I see a bunch of chat questions about, or Billy, I was going to, you got the couple, or one of the ones I was going to ask them was a quick tip for the holidays. How do we deal with grief for the holidays?
That's an excellent question. It's come up a lot. People, you lose somebody, whether it was a month ago, whether it was just this year or 10 years ago. That around the holidays, a lot of grief comes up and people are asking, for suggestions and help with that.
Yeah, it's been 7 years since my mom passed away. My mom and I were like best of buds, and we loved Christmas. And so I think the second year, which is like first year of grief for me, was a blur. First of all, let's start there. I don't remember anything about that first year. But the second year, I began to make what I call healthy decisions in my grief. So I made a point to celebrate Christmas because it was our favorite holiday. So I do all the Christmas tree, I cook all the favorite meals, I get my friends involved, I invite them to do Christmas trimming. And so I think one of the ways I've been able to cope with the holidays is to just create new traditions with the people that you love now. So yes, of course, it's unfortunate that your loved one isn't here, but think about the people who are still here that can benefit from the love that you can give to them. So I've created different traditions, Friendsgiving, we have a Friends Christmas. And so, yeah, for me, it was just about creating those new traditions to match or align with your new normal.
And several other questions have come up along the line of, we're talking about grief, and the number one grief thing that comes up is about the loss or the death of a loved one, or family member, or ourselves being terminally ill. But that's not all about grief. We have all kinds of different things that happen in our life, and people are asking us to speak to that. How do I deal with loss of a job, a friendship, my freedom, school ending, a divorce, moving, retirement, no longer being able to drive a car? I mean, there's all kinds of other things in our life that happen that can bring about grief. And so kind of rolling all that together, what advice do you have for people that are experiencing grief other than the death of a loved one or an imminent terminal illness?
For anyone who's read my book, they know that I'm probably as real can get. So I like to tell people that in addition to embracing death, we have to embrace change. And so as we go through life, as we get older, things are going to happen. You're going to lose your job through circumstances that you can't control, through things that you did. You're going to have to move. Maybe the marriage didn't work out. We have to be able to kind of accept change for what it is, learn the lesson, and then create something new from that. Oftentimes change happens and we're like, no, I don't want any change. I like this life. It's good. Why do I got to change? Because that's life. And so I think for me, the reality of what life is, the reality of what life gives me is how I'm able to cope. I'm not lying to myself. I'm not making any excuses. I'm not saying what I deserve or what I don't deserve because I don't know yet. I haven't received it. Whatever God has for me it's still revealing itself, And so I think oftentimes we make these decisions out of what we think we should have. And that's really not my choice. That's totally up to God on what I should have. And so whatever change happens, it happens. And I create new opportunities from that.
I think grief is a fact of life. It's one we don't get any training on. And
at all.
Denial and avoidance are not good coping strategies. They're not long-term fixes for us. But I think if we really fully grieve whatever those losses are, everything up and including mortality, that we start to build skills and an ability to be, okay, I lost my job. It's not going to be the end of the world, or the relationship ended and I need to feel it in order to heal it. And so for me, it's a progression of continuing to learn and learn, because there's always something going on that is coming into our life and going out, and how we deal with those smaller things other than our mortality, I think gives us good training to get us ready for the really big things.
Bill,
I think also, sorry.
Well, I think that, in my journey, I do think grief has been a constant companion, whether it was career reinvention or heartbreak. After my husband died, I had 10 years of terrible relationships. Many of you can relate to that if you are widowed. And what I've learned from that is you do have to feel the pain, because if you walk away from the loss of the transition of a loved one into another relationship or another job, and you haven't really grieved the first experience, it's going to come up. It's going to mess with how you move forward. And I always say you've got to have a pitiful day sometimes. And a pitiful day to me is when, let yourself stay in bed and watch a sad movie, or let yourself cry all day and listen to Joni Mitchell, like whatever it is that helps you clear your energy of that sadness. That is such an important part of the healing process. Like when my kids hear me watching Out of Africa, they'll all just roll their eyes and go, "Oh my God, she's having a day," because I have that movie memorized. It's a grief movie.
Sue, I hear you saying to not stop your grief from processing.
Right.
So if you've, and it's hard when it's compound. You've lost your job. Arturo's got some compound grief going on, and it's got to be processed. But if you can't process it all at once. Mm-hmm. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to try. And so call something forward, allow it to move. Well, what's the heaviest on your heart? What's the heaviest burden that you're carrying? And spend some time with that and move through it. Be upset about it. Cry about it. Feel it. Allow it to move through you. Say goodbye. Say hello. But I think if we stop the process at any time, and it's okay to say, I'm overwhelmed. My first thing that I need to deal with in my grief is the fact that I'm overwhelmed. And I have to take care of myself here first. I have to stop being overwhelmed. I have to take some deep breaths, or whatever my practice is. I have to pick up Emily's book or Alan's book or Ty's book or Sue's book and read a chapter. And I know Emily's book is just outlined so that you can find out what's going on that day. And Ty's got 26 resources, and Alan could make you chuckle even. And Sue's going to give you some permissions that maybe you don't think you have, but you do. And so you've got to let it process. And Bill,
So there's a couple other themes I want to make sure we touch on because it's come up a lot in the chat. And one is about having an estrangement from a daughter or son. There was some rift in the family and now they've split off. And, parents, you love your children and there's no longer communication. That's come up with many of the people that have commented. So I wanted to throw it out to see if anyone has any words of wisdom along those situations.
I think for me, my dad is still here, but we have definitely become estranged since my mom has passed. And so I've tried to kind of just love him where he is and understand that people are human. People make mistakes. Things don't really mend sometimes, and it can be hard. But I think you really do have to kind of, especially I'm thinking of like if I'm a mom and I'm not in the best relationship with my son, I have to give myself a little bit of leeway, a little bit of credit for just existing, because there is no parent handbook. There's no handbook that comes with even having a relationship with a husband or a friend. And so I think a lot of times we do put a lot on ourselves when things don't actually go the way we think it is. So the first thing I would do, especially during the holidays, is ease up on yourself, ease up on your mental, stop the negative self-talk, love upon yourself, know that you did all that you could with that relationship. And like everyone has said, just go through the process and grieve it, because you're going to have to, grieve that process.
I think one of the powerful things people can do is forgiveness. Forgive themselves for maybe not healing the relationship. Forgive the other person maybe for things they did to hurt the relationship. And also particularly in death and dying situations. I remember when my wife, that the doctor couldn't save her when my wife was dying. I had to forgive the doctor. I had to forgive myself that I couldn't do more for her. I had to forgive friends who pulled away because she was so young and they were the same age and they were afraid to come around or say anything or call. So there was so much forgiveness needed in these situations. And I think forgiveness could really help us move on, that we can't control everything. And the best we can do sometimes is just to forgive yourself and forgive the other person.
Another topic that's come up through many different people here in the chat that I didn't realize, and it may be an opportunity for one of you to write a book on, is that many people have said they've lost a sibling, and there's all kind of resources about losing a parent or a child, but couldn't find anything about siblings. And maybe it's already in one of your books and you could tell them, but if not, any advice along those lines, looking for resources to help with the loss of a sibling?
A lot of what you hear for other kinds of grief all applies to that. My sister just died almost exactly a year ago right now, and I was surprised at how it hit me. You kind of don't expect the person that you grew up with to not be there anymore, that you're there all the time. And what I've been doing, and what I've been with the conversations that we've been having here, I've been hearing so much heaviness and sadness that it's really important to be able to find something positive to focus on too. Because as long as we're just focusing on the negative, we attract more negativity. Where if we start focusing on positive things, then we can attract the positivity. So with my sister, I focus on our stories, on the experiences that we had, how awesome it was to get to do some of the things that we got to do together, and the joy that we had in the relationship that we had. And when you can start with any dealing with loss, if you can find positive things about it and get into that, write about it, talk about it, whatever you need to do that, it can really start lifting you up. And I'm not saying don't make it small. I'm saying that there's a balance in life. And it's very important to be able to take a deep breath and to be able to smile.
You know, for me, when I teach my classes at the seminary on ministry at the end of life, there's so many theories about grief today that you can look at, that you can read, that you can find online, and we have so many resources online. But I always go back to the very basics of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and knowing that it's not a linear scale, but it's a seesaw kind of ride through grief. I think we all go through powerful periods of the shock and denial. I think a lot of us experience anger, and that's good. And so is the shock and denial. I think a lot of us bargain. Oh, it can't be me, or God, I'll go to church every Sunday if you'll just bring James back to me for another year, or you know, a bargain for it can't be so, or I'll do this. And then I think we all go through depression, and we vacillate through all those. And I don't think we ever really get to acceptance, because the onion is always peeling. And the more we talk about these flows of grief, the more we talk about the ebb and flow of life, and we begin to accept it as part of the human experience, then we're able to go through these periods of grief with a little more grace.
And Rich, another theme that's come up, and I think we're all familiar with it, is people that have been caregivers, and they've been caregiving to a relative or a spouse for a number of years. Maybe they even moved in with them to take care of them, and now they've transitioned and are experiencing the loss of that person, but also I believe the loss of, you know, who are they right now? Because they've been a caregiver for however many years. So there, we talked about compound grief, but if anybody, I'm sure many of us have experienced it, but if anyone would like to share some wisdom to those who have been caregivers.
Well, I took care of Paul, Chrissy, and my dad when they were dying, and I do know that you feel completely reinvented when you move through grief. And I do think anyone who's going through grief and loss, as soon as we can accept that, yes, I have a whole new reinvention, and not cling to, like, don't be afraid to clean the house or move the furniture out from the hospital bed. Like, let it go as soon as you can and start allowing the new part of your life to fill in, because there is a greater consciousness here in charge, and you can put many different names to it, but your highest good is always coming to you. It is always helping you move forward, as long as we don't fight it too much. I'm a pretty stubborn person, and I can fight change pretty hard. But when I finally let go and just say, I don't know anything, I'm open, I surrender, amazing little miracles happen that let a person have a new life, or the inkling that a new life is coming. And that's how grief is a reinvention. And I believe it's a reinvention of every area of our life.
And I know we're coming to the end, but there is another theme that's come up, and that's many people resonated about saying, I know I felt it, or I've heard, or I've connected with my loved one after they passed. But there's also a lot of people who said, I haven't had that experience. And so they're questioning, well, why do some people have it and why do others don't?
Meditation, you have to meditate. We have to learn to quiet the mind, the monkey mind, so that we can hear the greater consciousness trying to speak to us. And, you know, I'm becoming a unity minister. Richard and Bill are unity ministers. And we talk a lot in unity about being quiet, sitting in the silence, sitting in the stillness to receive. And that's something the Western mind is very uncomfortable with. But if you can develop even a small 10-minute a day meditation practice, it will open that door so that your departed loved one can speak to you, or you can hear it finally.
And
Yeah,
Alan,
Richard, the interesting thing is this is kind of dovetails on what Sue just said, but I think a lot of people may have been in some ways contacted by their deceased loved ones, but they weren't quiet enough, as Sue said, or they weren't open enough to hear that or to see that. So yeah, I do think it's maybe part of who we are, that after a loved one has passed, we need to maybe be more, have more feelers out, or more, just be more open to what's about to happen. Because I had a major experience with that. Is it okay to share that right now? About, do we have time?
Running a little low on time, so Rich, it's up to you.
How much time do we have left, Bill?
Oh, we have another hour. I'm sorry. There we go. I was grieving not being able to talk about that. So.
Thank you, Bill.
I now have an hour. I have an hour to tell my story. Okay, great. I love
You,
it.
Ellen, you go right ahead. Meanwhile, Bill's been winding me down here for the last 15 minutes.
I'm in a different time zone, and so it threw me off.
Go ahead, Ellen, tell your story, please. And then I'd like us to go back and talk about forgiveness a little bit.
Right.
Go ahead, Ellen.
So after my wife died, I start looking into, because she had a great sense of humor, and I haven't told that story yet, but I'm sure we'll get into that. And so I start teaching classes about death and dying, and I did one for 3 hours, and there was a break in between the two parts of it. And just before the break, I looked over in the corner, and there was a woman that looked exactly like my wife. It just like stunned me. It's just, I had to stop speaking, but I also had to go on because the break hadn't come yet. And so I caught my breath and I went on, and I thought, well, break's coming up. I'll rush over to that woman and see who she is. This is amazing. And I started to go over to her, and someone tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around. They had a question for me. There was someone in the class, and I answered their question. I turned back, and the woman was gone, and she had never come back after break. And I still don't know if that was a real person, if that was just an image. But what I got out of it is that was my wife on some levels. Even if it was another person, it was my wife in that person. And what she was telling me was that what I was doing, talking about humor and therapeutic humor and humor in death and dying situations, was okay, that I could do it. Because I almost failed speech in college, so I wasn't a great speaker, but that I could do it, and it was important work, and that it was okay, and just to keep doing it. And so I believe it was somehow her spirit. And so we never know. One of my points is we never know when that's going to happen, or how it's going to happen, or what form it's going to take. But I think if we're open to the possibility of our loved one coming back in some form or other, or even just words or something we hear, if we're open to it and quiet enough to, slow down and be quiet enough to hear it, chances are, if it's going to happen, you will know.
I also wanted to add, I think it's also more about acknowledging that sometimes it's not necessarily their actual face that comes back to you, or their actual image that comes in a dream, or like you experience it. Like for me, sometimes it's coincidences. I hosted a retreat, my first retreat a few years ago, and I was really nervous and thinking, oh my God, I wish my mom was here. And a passerby just happened to stop and kind of listen to my speech. And so we kind of engaged. And at the end, I asked her, I said, oh, well, tell me what your name is. And her name was the same as my mom. And so a lot of times we see these coincidences and we're like, oh, whatever, her name was Yolanda. Like, no, that was my mom being present in a moment where I was fearful and needed her guidance. So I think a lot of times we're specifically looking for the image of our loved one to show up. And that's not always how the spirit form works. Sometimes, again, it's just that coincidence, that we experience or that we feel.
Once you realize there's no such thing as coincidence, you become very aware.
That part right there.
Yep.
You become very open.
My husband was diagnosed on a July 13th and died on a July 13th. I have had so many signs that just randomly show up on July 13th. Last summer, somebody called me up a few days before July 13th and said, hey, our speaker to a big group of grieving parents, our speaker just had to quit and we're wondering if you could fill in. And I said, what date is it? And she said, July 13th. And I went, thank you, Paul. Okay, yes, I would love to speak. I'm always aware of how Paul, my departed husband, is still 40 years later giving me July 13th hints. And we just have to be open and grateful to acknowledge those things. Because if we live in our left brain cynical mind, we'll dismiss all of it. And we're missing so much beautiful stuff unfolding just to help us heal.
And isn't that really a key in grief, is to get to gratitude?
Mm-hmm.
Is to get to gratitude, to move into gratitude, to begin to make a gratitude list, to be grateful for those coincidences that are happening, and include that into yourself and allow it to be a loving part of the process. Ty, I saw you shaking your head yes when I said about gratitude.
Yes, because that's my mantra, is choosing gratitude over grief. I think it's, or has been, I'm going to stop saying think that, because language is important. I know that it has been a pivotal part for me in my grief, is to be able to choose gratitude at every turn, at every situation. Again, I got married without my mom. I've got a new job without my mom, all things that are really sad and hard, but I'm also just grateful for those opportunities and grateful to be able to do what I love. Like, this is my full-time job. I get to write books. I get to talk to people about an experience that affected me in a way and also still impact, the world. And so I'm truly grateful for everything that has come. Even, again, my mom dying, it was the catalyst to where my career was going to go.
If our Emily, I'm going to have you next, but if our panelists, if you've been listening, if you don't hear anything else, listen to this conversation on gratitude, because it's an answer. It's a tool. It's a resource. If you're having trouble with your grief, if you're having trouble processing it, go to gratitude. Make even the shortest gratitude list you've ever had, and feel it, and be in the midst of that gratitude. Emily?
I had, after Jacques died, I was very much alone for a long period of time, and it was really hard. And I did come into contact with a couple different friends that each of them said, you need to think about what you're grateful for. And my response was, my husband died. I don't have anything to be grateful for. But when I started hearing it from, different places, I thought, I need to pay attention to this and at least try. So I thought, I'm going to sit down and see if I can think of a couple things that I'm grateful for. Once I started writing, I haven't stopped since, because it's so supportive for me that I could look at all these things, and I wasn't writing the same thing over and over again. It kept being grateful for things that we got to do together, or memories, or that I had a home to live in, that I had an income, whatever it was. The list just kept getting bigger and bigger. And I finally got a little notebook to carry in my purse, because it seemed like I was always thinking of something when I wasn't by my gratitude journal. So I'd have another place to write it down too, because I didn't want to miss any of it, because I knew that every time I wrote something down that I was grateful for, I started feeling better and better and better. And actually practicing that gratitude is what changed everything for me.
I'm of the generation that always has their phone in their hand. So in my notes app, I am grateful today, ... And it's literally a running list of things I'm grateful for. And I think also, to piggyback, it's also really good to write them down some kind of way, whether it's digitally or by hand, so that on the days when you are sad, when you're feeling a way, you can go back to that gratitude, jar or that gratitude journal, and you can really pull out the things like, wow, I was just grateful for the sun 2 days ago. What happened? And so it definitely can kind of just bring you back when you're able to write that down.
Yes.
The
It's a
other
huge
great
difference.
the other great thing about gratitude is it's an energy shifter. Like it
Mhm.
raises our vibration. And if you haven't heard from your departed loved one, often it's because your vibration, as it should be when you're grieving, is pretty low. You're in your sadness. But even if you could take 5 minutes to really lift your energy with gratitude, with prayer, with meditation, with loving kindness to others, those things all lift our energy. And when we raise our energy, our departed loved ones can communicate with us, and we can hear them. So it's a two-way process. And tonight, before you go to bed, just send a lot of love to your departed loved one, not sadness, but just gratitude and love. And I bet you they will come through and give you a dream visit that you'll remember when you wake up.
I also want to jump in here because there's another theme that I want to make sure that we address. And in Unity, we call it the tendency to do a spiritual bypass, where we have a challenge in our life and we jump right to the positive, and then we don't fully experience what it is that we're experiencing. And one of the questions or comments, Jacqueline said, how is being sad about my son's death being negative? I'm not negative, I'm sad. And I would say, be sad.
Yeah.
That you have to be sad, you have to feel your feelings fully. And as long as we're willing to do that, and Rich and I've talked about this on the radio show, where I say, if you're in the grocery store and the person in front of you's perfume reminds you of your Aunt Sally who just died and you want to cry in the grocery store.
Yeah.
Don't put it off until later. It's all about being willing to feel those feelings whenever and wherever they come up. And I believe when we do that, we become spiritual alchemists, and we start to, when we recall that person, job, whatever, that we start to remember the good stuff. And that's not saying we're not sad. It's just over time that spiritual alchemy happens. And so,
and also,
go ahead.
I've been accused of spiritual bypassing. And so I've thought about a lot what that means. And to me, what I think is that we have to do both things. We have to feel the pain. We have to get really into our grief. And trust me, I'm a huge crier. I really believe in feeling that pain. But the moment we have a little more energy, we can also then reach out through meditation, through gratitude, to try to connect to our departed, to see what we're grateful for. It's like we have two pedals. We've got to be kind of pushing them both. Like you're on a bicycle. It can't just be, hey, everything is great, I'm connecting to my departed child, or hey, life is horrible, I have no reason to live. You have to be kind of pushing both of those pedals, and that's what's going to move you forward.
I'd like to move us. Alan, let's hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I just want to dovetail on what Bill said about crying in the supermarket. I remember after my wife died, I had a business downtown San Francisco, and every day I had to pass the Bank of America building, tall, big, dark building. And several times a week I'd pass there and I would start crying. I have no idea why. My wife and I had no connection to that building. I didn't even bank at Bank of America. That wasn't I don't know why. But I just would honor it and I would cry. Okay, today I'm going to cry in front of the Bank of America building. And someone's passing by and sees me crying, so be it. Grief rears its head in very strange places sometimes. And you just need to go with it and just honor it. And tears are very healthy. Hopefully we're going to talk about humor and laughter, but tears and laughter are both come from the same well and can help us get through grief, and an important part of grief, because you don't want to hold those in. So if you're in the supermarket, if you're in the bank, whatever, and tears come, let them flow.
And hopefully if somebody asks you about it, you could tell them why. And that gives them the liberty and the permission to say, oh my goodness, I met somebody who was grieving, and they let it out in public instead of crushing it down and going home and trying to ignore it. So
they might cry too, and then you're both standing there. Right. Who knows? Yeah.
It was funny,
bank, but
someone had commented a little while ago about, I don't know if you guys saw, but Nick Cannon just lost his 5-month-old son, and he talked about it on his TV show. And so I wanted to also add that, to Bill's point, being vulnerable and sharing your story helps other people not only share their story, but also find comfort and relief in what they're going through. So I know for me, a lot of times I feel like I can be a burden by always, saying I'm sad or I'm this or I'm that or whatever. But I think it's really important for us to practice the art of being vulnerable, especially with the people that we love, our family and friends, because that's where we feel safe, right? And so I think it's really important for everyone to practice that vulnerability and kind of talk about their feelings when they're sad, when they're happy, when they had a moment. I hope this will be the start to us all being very vocal in how we feel about life and going forward.
So let's staying here where we are for a minute. And I've seen a number of chats come through about pets and the loss of pets. And I just wanted to go there for a minute while we're on gratitude. I remember several years ago, it was about 4 years ago now, I think it was, I lost my cat of 18 years. Mm-hmm. Well, I live alone. That cat was my life. My God, I was in grief. But what I wanted to talk about a minute was I had to have her euthanized. And my only solace during that whole process, during the day, waiting for the vet to come to the house, was gratitude. I just kept thanking her for the time we had together, for the trips that she was my companion on, for her being there when there was nobody else there. And I could hold her and she would purr. And I just kept telling her, thank you, as the vet was euthanizing her. And it was such a different type of a transition, for doing it in gratitude. The vet was crying, I was crying. And I mean, I was in grief, but it was different because I had already started the gratitude there. So anybody have any comments about the loss of a pet and the grief that goes around that? And
I would like to say that you just brought tears to my eyes, because I had a dog once that was very ill, and we were trying to decide whether to put her to sleep or not. And one day she was lying at the bottom of the steps, and in the hallway, and I just sat down at the bottom step and I was just petting her. And I don't remember if I was in gratitude, but I think I was, because I was like loving her, and just being so grateful she was in my life. And she stopped breathing. She died when I was petting her. And I thought, thank you for that gift, that she gave me, that last breath that I was with her. And so looking back, I'm certainly grateful for that moment, that precious moment.
Well, I do believe that, pets are sentient beings. They are fully conscious. They have a different way of processing information. Their minds are different, but they're fully conscious beings, I believe. So yes, we can speak to their spirit, and we can, even as they're crossing over, be telling them how much we love them and having little visits. I'm sure all of you have experienced feeling your cat rub against your leg, but then realizing that your cat is departed. I mean, these are common experiences where our beloved pets are showing us that their consciousness continues.
Well, for the few nights right after Desi was no longer with me, I kept hearing these sounds that I had always attributed to Desi, but Desi wasn't there. So I had to go find out what the sounds really were. So, there was a little humor in that, Alan, that here I was thinking it was Desi making that noise, but it was really, well, I won't say what, but so the loss of loved ones are part of the family. It's such a valid grief, and it adds into complicated grief, and gratitude is such a healing energy around that. Anybody else have any comments on pets or the loss of pets? And
Yeah, Yes, Rich, we had definitely, that touched the nerve. We had a lot of people commenting on that. And I really believe that's because when we have a companion animal in our lives, and I'm with you, Ty, on using our words, that a companion animal is different than not just a pet to me, but it's because they express unconditional love. And whether it's a partner, a spouse, any family member, it's a different relationship, because whenever you come home, the dog, I'm a dog person, is there and happy to see you and loves you. And it's just that, to me, that a whole experience of unconditional love, that we really feel that to the core. And they never say a word, right? So it's that loss that we feel, and people that don't have companion animals or can't quite understand, because they just haven't had that experience.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know if I agree with kind of segmenting grief, because I do think the one commonality is that the experience has changed for us, whether it's with your pet or your companion animal, your sibling or your mom or your brother or whatever. Like I don't know that segmenting it into that it feels different is necessary, because it feels how it should feel to you. And so, yes, grieving your pet or your mom will be different because they were different relationships, not because one was an animal and one was a human. Mm-hmm. And so I think we should kind of just look at grief is what it is, and these are the different relationships, and this is how I'm affected by each, including my companion animal, including my wife or my husband, or that. I don't know if I agree with that part.
I agree with you, Ty. I think we label it because we're brought up to label it that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to separate it. And the closer we get to acknowledging as grief, no matter what the topic is, that we're making headway that way. We're really starting to be able to look at our grief and how we process it, and that it doesn't, you don't have a trauma and then go into grief and then you finish.
Right.
It is just onward and onward. And I can't believe my mother's been dead for 30 years. And the trigger, who knows what can trigger that grief to come up. And I used to push it back. I said, what? You've processed that. And I slowly realized what a joke that was. I still had processing to do. And I could enjoy that processing when I realized that it was a good thing for me to do. I agree.
Yeah, I think the older I get, the more I process things differently, right? To your point, like my mom died 7 years ago, but each year something different happens in my life. Like I said, I got married, I bought a house. These were all things that I had expected to do with my mom, that I had expected to ask my mom for advice from. So I think also, in addition to grieving the experience with the human, we also grieve the expectation of what that relationship meant with us. And so to your point, 30 years on the line, you're still going to grieve. Something still going to trigger you, because you still have these expectations of, I should be 50 and my mom should be whatever age, and we should be doing this. And you know what I mean? So I think you're always there's like a evolving door of grief of sorts, just because we also are grieving those expectations of that relationship.
I think it's important, Reverend Rich, that we talk about how, I wrote this whole piece once about how when I was traveling, I lost my suitcase. It never showed up from Frankfurt, where I'd been traveling, and how I cried over that suitcase as if I'd lost a child. And the way I explained that was that when you've been through grief and loss, losing a suitcase, anything like that can trigger you back into that moment of profound loss. And that's okay. You need to cry it out. You need to have your pitiful day. You need to let yourself cry about a suitcase if that's what happens in your life, because life is a constant feeling of these passionate emotions here. And that includes sadness and grief. It's as important to us as feeling joy. So we can't really know joy unless we're also knowing grief. And I kind of think of it as every day you can feel both of those things. So if you lose a suitcase and suddenly you're so devastated you can't stop crying in an airport, That's okay, because you're probably really grieving about your mom or your child or your spouse. And that's what our culture has to really accept, is that that terrible crying that scares people so much, that is as natural to being human as laughter.
Well, and Sue, I just saw Veronica in the chat said, yes, Sue, I grieved when they pulled my tooth.
Right.
And so that sort of sums it up, doesn't it? Thank you, Veronica.
Richard, years ago, I wrote an article for Prevention Magazine, and the title was, Did You Die Today? And it was all about the little losses that we go through every single day, like the lost suitcase,
Right.
and how we can not only grieve that, but that those could also be a preparation for some of the bigger losses that we will experience in our life, including our own death. And so I think what we're talking about is this grief that is with us all the time, or that we experience all the time or every day. And how do we handle that?
Yeah, and Alan, let me ask you, as we're getting down towards more moving into question and answers, how do we handle it? By maybe bringing some humor into it? How do we even talk about humor and grief in the same discussion, huh?
Yeah, well,
about that for a minute.
Yeah, that was one of my things that interested me the most. Is years ago, I started researching humor in death and dying situations, and there was so little written on it. I remember spending weeks in the library looking. It was microfiche. Anyone out there remember microfiche? Not the computer, or did you get an answer in 30 seconds? So I would look, because I heard there was an article in the New York Times about humor in death and dying. And I spent over a week looking for that article. And then I found out it was cut because there was some major news conference or news happening. And I wrote to the author of it, and he sent me a copy. But most people don't associate humor and death. And I'm not talking about jokes, because comedians do tell jokes about death. It's telling the joke about a taboo subject, so it makes it even funnier. But you asked about humor and death and why we don't think of that. If we stop for a moment, often there is humor in the dying process. I mean, particularly at funerals, you know, people will look in a coffin and go, oh, that person never looked so good. You know, or there was a priest that I heard looked in the coffin. It was one of the new funerals he was doing, and said, folks, you know what we have here is only the shell. The nut is already gone. So the fact is, you know, tears and laughter, often they sound very much alike. Chuckles the Clown TV segment on, you know, is very famous for not being able to tell whether she's laughing or crying. It's very close. So how do we find it? I think like anything else, it's there when we're stressed out, when we're upset. We kind of put on these blinders, even though it's there. We don't hear it. We don't see it. We feel that we could feel guilty. I don't want to laugh. I might feel guilty if I laugh. What will my loved ones say? And the truth is, when I did research asking people, you know, how would you want your loved one to have you go on with your life? And over 90% of the people said, I'd want my loved one to enjoy life, to have a good time, and to laugh. And yet a lot of people don't do that.
And the spirits that have come back to me have always been laughing. My father appeared at the moment of his death when I was sitting in meditation. He was in the hospital. I was in meditation, and he appeared in front of me, and he was young looking and joking with me, trying to make me laugh. And at first I was like, Dad, wait, Dad, what are you doing here? And then I called the hospital and my brother Jim said, Dad just had a heart attack. And he had come to me right away with laughter, with humor, with playfulness. So our departed loved ones want to see us happy. They want to see us laughing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I got into the field because of my wife's great sense of humor. We used to laugh a lot together. And in fact, our friends were often getting divorced and we were still together after 11 years and they were separating and we would question each other. Why are we still together? And one of the key words that came up is because we laugh so much with each other. And the story I tell and really, it's really my signature story is that she was in the hospital with a copy of Playgirl magazine with the male nude centerfold. And she said, hey, Alan, I really like this picture this month of this nude man. She said, could you put it on the wall by the bed over there? And I said, Ellen, it's a hospital, a little risque for that. She said, don't worry, get a leaf from the plant and cover up that part. And I did that, and things in the hospital were fine for the first day, fine for the second day. But by the third day, the leaves started shriveling up and revealing what we were trying to conceal. And we would come home from the hospital and just look at a leaf or mention that incident, and we would start to laugh. Mm-hmm. And that was the moment I realized how vital laughter was in that situation, in death and dying, in grieving, because it instantly gives us a perspective. We get to see things differently. It lifts us up, even just for a couple of seconds, but it changes the whole situation. And so that's when I went back to school to learn about death and dying and to learn about the therapeutic therapeutic value of humor, and wrote my first book, The Healing Power of Humor.
Well, thank you, Alan. I thank you for giving us permission to allow humor into our grieving and to death and dying. I think when we stop and really begin having conversations about these topics, realizing that we can be authentic, and the more authentic we are, the more authentically we process, and the more authentically we heal. And I want to just talk for a moment, because I see the word guilt running through the chat quite frequently. And all the panelists are shaking their head. They've been seeing it too. And let's each share something about the process of guilt and grief, if you think about it for a minute. But I know myself, now I'm better at it now than I used to be, but I've had a lot of practice. I could feel guilty about almost anything. If I just, if I wanted to, I could go to guilt. And we do tend to go to guilt. And we do tend to feel that, we're not enough of, or we're not worthwhile enough. And that's where guilt comes from. And so it's okay to feel guilt, but usually I can't find a reason to hold on to that guilt. And so Ty, what do you say about guilt in the midst of this process, and each one of you after that?
As it relates to grief, I had to realize that there was nothing that I could have done differently to save my mother. There was nothing I could have done differently that would have ended in her not dying. And so once I realized that all of the experiences that we had, I remember we argued about how to make Big Ziti a few days before she passed away. And I beat myself up for months and months. And I shouldn't have said this and I shouldn't have said that. But that argument didn't cause her death, wouldn't have saved her, And so once I realized that I am not, none of us are in control of death. None of us are in control when the Lord says it's time for you to go home. None of us. And so once I realized that I wasn't in control, it was easier for me to let go of things. Even to Rich's point, even in my regular day life, once I realized that there's just certain things I can't replay If I say something, I do my best to make sure that my intentions are filled with love, and I leave it on the table as that. But far too often we beat ourselves up about the things we said, the things we do. Can we do it different? How do I do it this way? Can I be better? Then we also think about like the killer of being perfect. All of those things I just have to let go and just know that I'm doing my best at all times, and I am not in control of this.
Thank you. Thank you. Sue?
Well, I believe that anytime somebody dies, there are people left behind who feel guilty about it, no matter how that loved one crossed over, because our egos want to believe that we're in control, just like what Ty was saying. So if the unimaginable happens, a loved one dies, then our ego is going to tell us that somehow it's our fault. And I think guilt is the biggest impediment towards healing when we're grieving. And in my grief workshops, I have people write their guilt story. We do a writing exercise where they write all the things they should have, could have done differently, that maybe would have saved their loved one. And then we share those stories with each other. And what we find is that everybody has the exact same guilt story. I argued, or I did this or that. And then collectively we realize, oh, that's just the human experience, is we want to feel guilty because somehow that gives reason to something that we just can't, it's unfathomable that a loved one would die. And so we surrender it, knowing that the soul leaves the body when the soul determines it's time to go. And it has nothing to do with what we do or don't do for them.
Amen. Emily?
I was just thinking about both of my husbands had congestive heart failure and ended up on dialysis, renal dialysis. And when I got together with Ron and we were talking about what had happened to Jacques, we were talking about what it's like to be on dialysis and what happens with that. And about how a doctor friend of mine had told me that dying from renal failure is really kind of a nice way to go, because you just kind of gradually go to sleep and it's not a great deal of pain, and then it's over. And we talked about that, and Ron at that point didn't have any kidney issues. And he said, if I'm ever at the point where I have to decide whether to go on dialysis or not, I don't want to go on. That will be an indication to me that it's time. And so we had that agreement. And when it came right down to it, we got a call on a weekend. His doctor was going out of the country, and he had called his nurse and said, Ron's lab tests are terrible and he has to go to the hospital right now. And she called and we said, we were just in the office a couple of days ago and the doctor said it was going to be months or years before we had to worry about anything. What happened? And she said, well, it could be a faulty test. So we latched onto that. And I convinced him to go to the hospital to have that test rerun so that we could see whether or not it was a problem with the test as opposed to him actually going into renal failure. And we got to the hospital and they just whisked him in and took him off to dialysis. And he was so upset with them. They wanted to take him in and put in a port so that he could have it instead of just doing it on a one-time basis. And he said, no, I don't want to do this. He ended up getting the dialysis anyway. They were just kind of overpowering him, and he was at that point pretty sick. And when he came out of it, both of us were feeling guilty because we had this agreement that wasn't going to happen in this case. And the end result was I got about 7 more months together with him that we wouldn't have had otherwise. But those months were miserable because of something else that had happened that just kept getting worse and worse, and we couldn't get anybody to help us with. And that was the one place where I felt guilt. So we both talked about that guilt a lot. And he said, I know you really wanted me to have the test, and I did it, but I also had the capability of saying, no, I'm not going to. So we both, it comes back down to forgiveness. We were both able to really talk about it and really forgive each other for the incident that had happened, even though it was literally life-changing. And we were able to get through it that way. And we just made a commitment to be staying in the moment for the rest of his life and making it the very best it could be, because we did have more time than we would have had he not started at that time.
Beautiful story, Emily. Thank you. Beautiful story. Thank you. Forgiveness
Mm-hmm.
and communication, talking with each other and working through the guilt and finding out that it's really unnecessary and being together. Thank you. That was lovely. Alan, a comment?
Yeah, I think today many people might have survivor's guilt.
Mm-hmm.
With so many people dying of COVID, why am I still here? And I think I had some of that when my wife died. Why did she die and not me? And what I come to realize is that her work was done. And she set a path to me to do my work and to help thousands of people in the world. And it's something that perhaps she couldn't do, didn't want to do. I don't know what it was. But I don't think I felt survivor's guilt for too long once I realized that something I once heard someone said, or something I read, which was that if you're still here on earth, your work is not done.
Yeah.
So I think her work was done. She had influenced a lot of people in her life, and she left. And
yeah,
I'm still here because I still have work to do. Simple as that.
I've been saying for a long time that the ones here who are most enlightened leave early, and the rest of us here are still trying to learn and grow. So I figure I'll be here to be 100, I'm a slow learner.
Agree with you, Sue. Totally agree. Yes.
My minister used to tell me, he's a student of life, not yet a graduate.
Right.
I continue to be a student of life. And there is one aspect of grief that I would like, or a guilt that I would like to address around the idea of grief. And that's that, because there are many comments have come through about saying, I've been beating myself up for years because I wasn't there the moment that my mother, brother, daughter, whoever made their transition. Now, it's been my experience, and I'm opening up to the panelists, over the years, that you could be on a vigil for 23 and a half hours because you want to be there for that person. And then you get up to go to the bathroom and you come back 5 minutes later and they're gone. And as far as I'm concerned, that's not, it's not a coincidence that
Right.
They were waiting.
Right.
For many people making their transition, I believe on a conscious level, on their consciousness, that if they don't want to put you through that particular experience, that they'll wait for that to happen. So when people go out to say, I'm going to go on on a vigil, I tell them this ahead of time so they don't beat themselves up, because I've talked to so many people over the years that have been holding this guilt for 20 years that they weren't there.
And Bill, if I could speak to that, the spirit is trying to leave the body at the moment of death. And that's a hard detachment if your loved one is sitting there, right there, holding your hand, telling you they love you. And it's almost like a relief to them when we get up and walk out for a minute. It's an easier transition for their soul to leave the body then. And I always tell people, the soul is doing it the way they need to do it. So if you're there, then that means they needed your comfort. If you're gone, that could mean they were just too attached and it was too hard to leave while you were with them.
Well, and having been a hospice nurse, I think I've been with almost 2,000 people when they passed away. And I can tell you that that is worthless guilt, because the soul will leave the body when it's ready to leave the body, and not before and not after. And it's not about us. And we tend to want to, think that it's still about us, but it's about that spiritual being that's getting ready to be a spiritual being again and be done with this human experience. And so we shouldn't feel guilty if we're not there at that moment. We should be grateful that they got to pass or to make their transition when they wanted to make their transition. There's no need for any guilty feelings about that, but yet we still have them. And one of the other things that I want to mention before, Billy, if you want to start pulling Reverend Bill, if you want to start to pull any questions together here, we're going to go into a question and answer session. I'd like to tell our participants too, if you have a particular question, we'll see if we can get to it for one of the panelists. Put it in the chat right now. And I think that what we're hearing again is that the more conversations we have about grief, about death, about dying, about more that we accept that is a part of this human experience, that we're all going to do it. And the more we talk about it, the more we'll move away from these guilt feelings that we hold on to for so long. And we'll even have them processed before the loved one leaves us. We can begin that processing. Billy, do you have a question for us?
Well, there's a number of questions that have come up around the topic of suicide and guilt and grief.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll put that out there.
Who would like to take that on? I know that is a subject where the person that's left behind can feel a lot of guilt. And Emily.
I do a lot of social media, and I see so much on death by suicide and the people that are left behind. And I see more guilt with those people than anybody else. They have a really, really hard time letting go of the fact that it was the person's decision, not their decision to make. And they have a really hard time allowing themselves to deal with it. And I just think it's really important in a case like that to self-love. Take good care of yourself. Know that you did the best that you could under the circumstances. Know that you love that person, whether or not they did what happened, and that you don't have anything to feel guilty about. That you didn't do it yourself, and it's just really, really important to not allow your life to deteriorate. And I've seen this happen. That's why I'm mentioning it. Don't let your life go to waste because someone else died, but rather remember the good things about them, remember the joy, put the emphasis on whatever you can that's positive. And again, forgiveness. Forgive yourself for whatever you think you had a role in the situation.
And if I could just add right onto the end of that, Emily, don't not seek help.
Yes, that's right.
Seek help. Counselor, get yourself into a grief group. Sue, I'll get you in a second. A grief group for suicide, those that are left behind. If you're, there's that acute grief that happens right at the beginning. And then there's grief that we all go through. And then there's chronic grief. And if you find yourself being stuck, don't hesitate to go to hospices, have grief groups. Sue, maybe you have a comment. Maybe you can say a little bit more about this and that.
Well, I work with grieving moms every day. My client base is primarily grieving moms. And I would say about maybe 40% of those moms lost their children to, I'm not going to say lost, their children chose to leave early. They don't even want to say committed suicide because it's like commit a sin. And when we take religious dogma out of the story of suicide, It is simply a soul not being able to continue on in that lifetime. And that's a soul exit choice that any of us can make. It has no judgment by a God in the sky, which is what religious dogma does to it. And instead, when I connect with those spirits on the other side, you know, they are happy, they are loving their loved ones here on earth. Some of them feel enormous sadness that their mother is grieving so much because they don't want their mothers to feel that pain, and they're trying to send so much love to them. But they are free, and they are learning, and they are processing from the other side. And we have to get our cultural stigma around suicide completely turned around, because it tortures the parents when they lose a child and their community shuns them, especially a religious community, because their child chose to cross over. It is simply a soul's choice.
Thank you, Sue.
I definitely piggyback on what Rich said. We can, when we go through grief, especially experiencing this kind of grief or any other, it's good to bring all your resources to bear, you know, to your friends or your family or support groups or psychologists or psychiatrists or social workers, hospice. I mean, there's all kinds of resources. And as far as I'm concerned, we need as much as we can to be able to help us through these challenging times. And I know we're getting close to the end of our hour. I double checked this time, and I want to make sure that each one of the panelists has an opportunity to kind of do a wrap up, and also to put your social media link in the chat. So if people want to get one of your books or have a further conversation, they know how to get in touch with you. So
well, Bill, all of that is, let me mention, thank you for that, Bill. All of that is going to be coming out in an email. How to contact the panelists and their social media links will be coming out in an email about a week after the show, and somewhere in that time period. So look for that. And I do want to have a last minute comment from our panelists and kind of wrap it up if they could. Thank you, Bill. Sue, leave us with a word of wisdom this evening, if we could.
If Mother Grief has chosen you in this lifetime, that means you're a highly evolved soul. You're here to grow on the accelerated path. And my heart is with you. All of our hearts are with you. And remember, your departed are probably loving you and hugging you even right now in this moment.
Oh, amen, Sue. And I just got a message. Thank you. We would like each panelist to put the social media contact in the chat. So thank you for that. And last comments, Alan Klein.
So I'd like to quote a couple of things by Woody Allen, who said, "I'm not afraid of dying. I just don't want to be there when it happens."
Won't be.
He also said, "Birth is a fatal disease." So I just want to encourage people listening that both tears and laughter are connected, and not ignore the laughter, because it could help us get through our tears.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for being with us this evening. And
thank you.
You could have left those two jokes. I mean, thank you for bringing those two jokes. Ty, how about you?
Sorry, I had myself on mute. I think that it's really important that we all tell ourselves the truth about our feelings and what we go through when just in life, but also in particular about grief, because that's what we're talking about. But I think it's really important that we tell ourselves the truth. A lot of times we suffer because of the feelings that we're lying about, or the feelings that we're sitting on, or the feelings that we're not acknowledging. So I hope that during this holiday season and into the new year that we can lead with truth and love.
Thank you, Ty. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Emily.
My message is of being happy when you're grieving, and know that as bad as you may feel right now, that it's not always going to be that way. each day can be a little bit less and a little bit less until finally you get to a point where you realize that you're grieving and living at the same time, and that you can smile and that you can feel love. And when you focus on love for yourself and unconditional love for others, that can bring you lots of comfort. So seeking comfort and seeking human contact is really, really important. And it's a good way to take care of yourself during the holidays.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you for being with us. And Billy, what final word do you have for us?
Well, my final word is really to thank all the participants in the chat room, because so many of you are supporting each other. Somebody makes a comment, 5 or 6 other people are right there, with you, loving you, supporting you. And to me, this is all part about getting that support system going. You're doing it right here. Expand the group of people that you're with that are able to talk about this topic, and let the healing continue.
Thank you, Bill. And I see that one of our chat moderators just posted into chat the information about Silent Unity. And I want to mention it because I think that Silent Unity is a great place to go if you have a need, if you're feeling grief, if you just would like somebody to talk to. Silent Unity is always there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Somebody is always praying in Silent Unity. So please don't hesitate to call and to copy that information out of the chat. And I want to say thank you for being with us here tonight on the healing power of grief. It's been great to talk with you. I hope you're all taking something away from this evening that you'll be able to use as you move through the ongoing process of grieving. Jared, I think you have a slide to put up about contact, and Unity does offer spiritual booklets and resources for grief. Grief is a Spiritual Path is a particularly beautiful book, Peaceful Passing, for anybody having someone going through the grieving process or going through the dying process right now. And also we talked about caregivers, spiritual caregivers for caregivers, and that's also a beautiful book. So unity.org, get outreach. Thank you. Thank you once again. Don't run from grief. Embrace it. It's part of the human experience. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.